Hello and welcome to another LinkedIn Live brought to you by Orbition Group, the first one of 2025. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm super excited about this topic. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll probably see this is one of the major themes of most of our posts. And to be honest with you, I think if this is something that we can get right as an industry, we'll really move the needle. So, a bit of housekeeping. As always, the most important thing to us here is that this is a very interactive session. So I'm sure there's a ton of questions that you've got. Please make sure that you get them in as we're going through. I'll try to fit the questions in where most applicable, and hopefully we get through the large majority of them. If there are questions that unfortunately don't get answered for any reason, we'll try to come back to you separately at the end, whatever the case may be, and get as many of them covered as possible. So without further ado, I'd love to bring up to the stage the one and only Mr. Peter Everill.
Hey, Kyle. Hello, everyone, and thank you for your time this afternoon.
Yeah, so Pete, thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing?
Doing slightly nervous, but looking forward to giving this a go. So if anyone's got any questions, welcome them, but go easy on me, will you?
I'll try, obviously, yeah. So as always, we'll make this really conversational, hopefully a bit of fun and really engaging. As I said just a second ago, I personally think this is the topic. If we can get this right and somehow kind of integrated into the mindset and behaviors of how we operate as an industry, then this is the thing that moves the needle forward and stops all this kind of naysaying of there is no value, companies don't get value, and all that conversation that we keep unfortunately landing back at. So Pete, before we kind of jump into the meat of the topic, and I want to make sure that we spend most of our time on the meat of the topic because it's really powerful stuff, but just give us a bit of a brief introduction into you, your background, your journey today, and probably just a little bit of a hook into specifically as it relates to this topic, if you would.
Yeah, okay, here goes. So, yeah, I'm a data leader or data product leader, focused specifically on improving the P&L performance of a business through the use of data, emphasis on P&L, because that is my passion, why I'm talking today. I've led teams to deliver over £100 million worth of P&L benefits annually, plus many more one-off benefits on top. I've worked in data for 20 years across 12 companies as a consultant and employee. My aim is for the CEO and everyone in a business to know exactly where they need to focus and what action to take to drive performance. And I'm hugely passionate about data because I think this is the USP of data. And my mission is to coach data in the business on how to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. What I love about you, Pete, is that you're so modest about this, right? And I know that we had a conversation offline where you kind of said when you first delivered kind of a talk on this topic, you were kind of expecting people to kind of say, yeah, obviously, like that's you're just doing your job. And in fact, that probably can't be further from the truth in reality. So I'm really looking forward to diving into this with you. Before we do, and I think I mentioned to you offline, I think there's definitely kind of like a cultural expectation and alignment piece here between what data analytics is or could or should be or can be and how businesses perceive it. So I guess just to set the scene a little bit and kind of tee this up, was this something that has been driven by you in a sense of, did you create the expectation that actually data should be doing this for you as a business, Mr. CEO, Mrs. CFO, whatever the case may be? Or have you worked in environments where the business has kind of said, well, hang on a minute, if we're putting X in, then I'm expecting something back? What has that journey been like?
Yeah, I would say there's probably a couple of parts to that, Kyle. I think first off, it's my natural position. So I think when you talk to people in the data industry, I think the first thing, acknowledge that there's many different hats people wear and things they're interested in and passionate about and where their skill lies. I'm passionate about making impact to the P&L, and I sort of come at it from a business first mindset. And I got into data all those years ago because I thought data was incredibly powerful to drive performance of a business. So I guess, first of all, it's my natural inclination of what I believe in. Second driver is probably fear, and keeping myself in work, keeping myself employed by demonstrating ROI of what I do and of what teams do. And I think, if you, no matter which sort of function of an organization you are in, to get further up that organization hierarchy, if that's your inclination, you have to be more and more focused about how you're driving a positive impact to P&L. And that doesn't matter whether you're in commercial, logistics, marketing, obviously finance, procurement. I think the same is for data.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, it's funny there you kind of talk about this is your natural inclination and, this is what you're passionate about. But I guess I've sat in this space for long enough now and interviewed that many people. I kind of look at this and think, well, surely this is the only thing. This is the only way, right? Like it shouldn't be anything else but kind of driving business performance. And I know there's a whole host of stuff that comes before that to get to that point, which is equally important, of course, but that this is the job, right? Which, really interesting. Okay. I love the way that you frame the kind of USP of data. So let's start there, and then we can jump into kind of the meat of it. But just talk us through kind of what you view as the kind of the purpose and the USP of a data team.
Yeah, perfect. And I'll actually start at the top with a CEO, right? Because that's who ultimately you've got to make friends with, right? So if you think about a CEO's primary responsibility is return on capital employed for shareholders, growth of the business in some way. And there's two principal ways that they can do that. They can create new business, so acquisitions, launching new products, new markets, new geographies. That's the first way, and it's the less frequent way, and it's the most risky way. The second is they can drive performance improvement of their existing business, right? And that's something they can continually do. And I always think about a business in the simple context that it's a set of processes, right? You're looking to improve a set of processes. A process is a set of decisions and actions, and improvement of those decisions and actions leads to improvement of the business. And I look at then my role that I can play as a data person in this, and I think, well, what do experts do when they want to help someone improve performance? So I look outside of the data world to like a doctor, to a financial advisor, to a personal trainer, and they have two common traits that they're always looked on for, which is you go to all of them to improve performance, whether that's health, fitness, or finances. And they always come back with two things. They guide you on where to focus and what action to take. And the more obvious and prescriptive you make that, the higher you value their services. And so that's what I'm ultimately selling to a CEO and everyone in the organization, where to focus and what action to take. To bring that up to life with an example in the knowledge world, right? In the modern world, a lot of companies are made up of lots of expensive people. If I take a software team, for example, that team might cost £1 million, $2 million in the States, right? The most important trick a CEO can play in that regard is making sure that team is focused on the most valuable opportunities to drive performance, because otherwise that team's costing £1 million, $2 million, right? You need them productively driving performance of the business. And McKinsey did a great study on this where they researched a couple of thousand companies of any shape, in any industry, in any geography. And the research found a few traits, but one of the traits is, and this research was to try and identify of the CEOs whose companies were performing better than their peers in industry, so across many industries, the top performing companies in the industry, what made them successful? And one of the superpowers the successful companies had was the ability to make everyone in the organization aware of where to focus and what action to take to drive performance. And it sounds incredibly simple, but it's incredibly difficult. And a lot of companies are leaving a lot of value on the table by not doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much to unpack there. I mean, I think the cost, the notion of cost around people specifically is huge, right? Because most businesses, this journey began from a place of hype and FOMO, right? Like, we know there's opportunity here. Like, that's the tagline I hear all the time. Like, why are you investing in this? We want to get more value from data. Now, what that means in the context of that business in their mind can vary, but there's teams out there. There's big banks, as an example, that have 1,000, 2,000 people in their kind of centralized data function. Like, you're already into the tens of millions of pounds there, right? As far as salaries go. So, like, if we are then in a position where we kind of say, oh, well, we've done all this great work, but we don't know what it's actually done or delivered or driven in terms of like output and performance improvements, then, it's kind of no wonder that we're in this place where business leaders then going, what are we doing this for, right? Why did you develop the framework then? Like, what was there a moment in time as a catalyst? Like, why did you develop it? What was it intended to do?
I'll come to that, Kyle, but I've just realised that I haven't told you about the USP of a business, a data team. So we've established the need of a CEO and everyone in the organisation, right, as you've just alluded to. And then I go, right, well, which function in an organisation is best to provide the information on where to focus and what action to take? And this is the USP of a data team, right? It's where to focus and what action to take. And it does this through a few simple ways. Firstly, metrics. And I think metrics aren't talked about enough in the data industry. Metrics are the most powerful thing for a data team because they make performance observable and they allow to root cause performance. And if you look at, from my research, the companies that I would consider most data-driven, I would actually say they're metric-driven, and they utilize metrics much more than the rest of companies. And then once they've got those metrics, they focus on good old analysis and statistics, which helps to find patterns in performance, deviation in performance, volatility in performance, which informs where to focus. Statistics also inform what type of action to take. And I'll talk a bit later about the classification of types of actions, because actually, I think there's only 4 or 5 actions a business can take to improve performance, and you can identify them through analysis. And then third, finally, the only time I'll talk about tech is the pace, right? So tech can enable you to measure, analyze, and understand performance at such a rapid scale that's where it becomes powerful. And then the other part about data is it's an objective truth seeker, right? So humans are all well-intentioned, but they will have bias in them. Now, data will have bias in it, but its intention is to be much more objective. And through the good use of measurement and analysis, can provide a level of objectivity that no other function in the organization can. So, the USP of a data team is in a metric of measuring and analyzing performance of a company.
Yeah. 100%. Got it. Makes perfect sense. So onto the framework then. What was the catalyst? What was the point in that? And I guess, why did you feel like you needed to build something to help you measure this?
Yeah, it was. I worked in consultancy for 10 years. So one of the things you learn in consultancy is the importance of methodologies, repeatable methodologies that you can train people on to deliver, right? And And as I sort of grew my career, I realized it was less and less about whether I could deliver something, and more about can I train people, treat teams to deliver this. And so I think in the interests of trying to spread this across an organization, had to build and codify a methodology for how we could do this. I think one of the things I observe about the data industry, and this is just an opinion, and I've got a very small siloed view of the data industry, but we essentially take a lot of great technical people, put them in the room, and kind of hope for the best, that something will happen. And I guess my consultancy experience was like, no, got to then work on a methodology of how they work together to solve performance problems.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I see time and time again, right? I mean, and that stems all the way up to the decisions that people make around hiring, who they hire, what they hire, what skill sets they hire. And often it is very much a case of, well, we'll go and hire this person, we'll, a leader, we'll bring in these people, we'll give them this resource. And then it's like, you go and uncover the value, like whatever that is. And obviously that's a dangerous game to play, right? When you go in digging for gold, as opposed to looking at what are the key business metrics of how they track performance that you can then go and see where you can improve. So makes perfect sense. Obviously, we want to spend most time here on that methodology and what it is, and make sure people walk away having some kind of clearer idea about how they can maybe go away and implement this. But what are the potential consequences in your eyes if you don't have something that can help you quantify?
I'd say I'd answer this by consequences of the business and then consequences to the data team. I guess the consequences to the business is firstly they miss out on a load of performance opportunities, and they probably don't have a warm fuzzy feeling from their data team that they've got a methodology to help them and partner with them to support solving performance. And then on the data side, I think you're reliant on the business putting a lot of trust in you, and you've always got competition. And the risk with an internal data team, if you don't have a consultancy methodology, is you get beaten by consultants, right? And the business will go, I'm not sure you can do this. I'm going to go out and pay a consultancy to do this for you. So I would say that was one. And then the other thing is you're reliant on the data literacy of people in the organization. Now, improving data literacy is something I wholeheartedly support, and I think is a valuable exercise. But actually, I always say I don't want the business people to be too fussed about data literacy. It's not what they're paid for. I want the business people to be really clear on their business problems, and I'll work out the data literacy and what needs to be done. So I think, the benefits of this methodology is to the data teams is they get to make impact, they get to work on higher value pieces of work, and if they've got a methodology that they can explain to stakeholders, they spend less time explaining their methodology and more time actually doing the work.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the amount of conversations I have, Pete, that comes down. We talk about data literacy a lot, right? And I think it's about getting that balance right between, yes, there needs to be some kind of education and upskilling about the importance of data and what it could or should be doing for a business, and how businesses can do that, for sure. But I think you're right. There is a huge element of making data analytics teams more business literate to focus on the right metrics. I can see some of the comments on the right hand side here that are talking about, it's not that data teams aren't focused on metrics; they're often focused on the wrong metrics, which is a very fair thing to say. We can see some questions coming in, so as they start to build up, we'll try to get those answered. Who's this for, Pete? So before we jump into the actual meat of the methodology, who is this for? Is this for the CDO, the data team in its entirety? Is it for the business, in quotation marks? Like, who is this framework for, and who will get the most use out of it, I guess?
Yeah, it's for everyone in the organization, and it's back to the business and data. It's the business that you've got an approach that you can sell to them, and also educate them on their role in it, because the big part about data and why it's so challenging is it's so cross-functional. It doesn't operate in a silo. It needs support from the business SMEs, finance, sponsorship. And so it's really important to have a methodology of this is how we will help you solve performance problems, but also to communicate, and this is your role in it. This is what we'll do as a data team, and this is what we need from you, from finance, from sponsorship, from business SMEs, and articulate that collaboration.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Nora's asked a very interesting question here, but I've got a feeling we might get to that in the methodology. But Pete, let me just ask you, because you can kind of maybe knock this out of the park quickly. So Nora said that she wholeheartedly agrees on the importance of metrics. It would be good to understand your view on how to identify which metrics drive performance versus the metrics which report on performance, and are they usually one and the same thing, which is a very interesting question.
It's a great question and a great segue into the methodology. So
go on then, take it away.
As a prequel to the methodology, I'll talk about the performance gap in most organizations, and by performance gap, I'm actually meaning metric gap. So I think if you talk about a pyramid, you start at the top with your P&L metrics, so often referred to as your lag metrics, so ultimately sales, costs, etc. And they how you measure how your business has performed, but they don't tell you how to improve. And so there's the concepts which Jeff Bezos framed, which is controllable inputs. And controllable inputs, in my mind, is a great word for processes. So processes are the inputs to the P&L output. And so back to the concept of this is all about processes. A lot of organizations don't have the metrics to measure their processes. And so I major a lot on what I call failure state metrics, which is you take a process and you brainstorm with SMEs in a lean type way, lean thinking, ways that things can go wrong. You literally brainstorm all the ways that a process can go wrong. And you then create metrics to measure that. Right. So what are all the ways that this process can go wrong? Have I got a metric to measure that? And this is where the data industry doesn't talk a lot about the purpose of a data analytics team is actually to create metrics and agitate to capture data to enable it to put numbers to those metrics. Super, super important, because without this layer of understanding how your processes are failing, and you don't get to the right action, because too many actions and roadmaps and initiatives go straight into P&L metrics like sales, like costs, and this is completely wrong, because what you get from a CEO perspective is on a Monday morning they say sales has gone up, and everyone around the room goes, "Oh, that was my initiative," and there's 100 initiatives that have driven sales up, and then conversely, the next week when sales are down, no one will fess up, and it's apparently the weather or the economy or seasonality, right? So that's a real problem for a CEO. And so what you're trying to get to is really granular failure state metrics that you can measure which are the biggest failures, i.e. where to focus. If there's 10 ways a process can go wrong, which is the biggest way it's going wrong? That's where we need to put the most of our effort, most of our capital. And then the more granular you become with metrics, the more actionable they become. So if you take availability as a measure, for example, well, pretty much all the organization in a retail business can input into the success of availability, right? So you need to map all the ways that availability can go wrong, and then you're measuring like who can do what to improve those granular metrics.
Interesting. Okay, fine. So methodology then.
Yeah.
How do you break this down? Like, imagine you were talking this through with your someone in the business, right? Who's but break it down for us in terms of the key steps.
Cool. Okay, so let's take a process, right? And you can take a broad process or narrow process. And the first step you do is you brainstorm how this process can impact the P&L. So what are all the ways that this process could create sales, lose sales, drive, create costs? And actually, this is an exercise you can do with finance and business SMEs, right? But this is a good mind map. And actually, the more of experience doing this, the more you find out. Actually, when you really think about it and put people in a room together, actually you identify more ways than you expect that a process can impact the P&L, right? So you've got your ways in which the process can impact the P&L, the output effect. And then what you want to try and get to quite quickly is what's the size of the prize of the way that a process is impacting the P&L. So, how much do we think this process is driving lost sales or driving excess costs? And we can be iterative through this and importantly work with finance to get their buy-in to whatever you're suggesting. And this is a really important exercise because this creates the business interest and sponsorship and agitation to suddenly become interested in data. If you can say, oh, there's a process going wrong and actually it's costing us £10 million worth of lost sales, you as a data team, you're going to get some interest, right? Mm-hmm. And then hopefully you're going to get the right level of sponsorship and investment to then go, oh, well, what do we do about it? Okay, well, give us a bit more money and we'll tell you. So next you've got a rough view and you might have to do a couple of these things in parallel, but essentially you map out the process, right? With business SMEs, those that know the process, because you need their expertise, but you also need their buy into this. And like I say, you map out, you create the metrics, design and create the metrics, failure states, what I call them, to measure how that process can go wrong. And I mean, this is classic McKinsey consulting, right? In terms of going into an organization and creating issue trees of unpacking a process into a set of issues. So you're essentially doing some classic consulting there. And then what you're wanting to do is we're jumping ahead a bit to say you've got the metrics designed, measured, and you've got data for them, is to get do some good old statistical analysis of the performance of that those process and those metrics, because this helps inform types of action, which I'll come on to, but it also helps you identify if this is a silver bullet or actually quite a few things going wrong. So is this a particular product, particular store, particular market, particular geography going on, or actually is it all sorts of those things actually in randomly any given day or any given time of the year? Because again, that helps show the importance of breaking it down into lots of sub issues that each need addressing. Because I guess as organizations mature, you're finding less and less silver bullets, right? There's no obvious answer. And it's actually turns out it's 100 micro answers that you've got to work on all. So you understand that. And then what you're wanting to get to next is a metric is only valuable if someone's going to take action for it. So what I'm not promoting here is metrics for metrics' sake, right? You ultimately want to go to, well, this is a metric if something goes wrong. Based on our organizational design, which role in the organization would be responsible for that? And engaging with them, onboarding them and going, okay, what can you do about that? And what's the feasibility of you being able to do something about that? Because that's really important, and they need to buy in. And you also need to understand, like, at what point do they need that metric? When does it become useful in their workflow? It's, what we're trying to get away from is giving them a metric at the end of the month saying how bad they are. Like, can you get the metric in their workflow? So at worst, it's highly reactive to prevent further performance deterioration. But at best, it's preventative, and you can get to them before you're spotting a performance failure. And then I talk about type of actions, and I guess from reviewing like all the ways I think performance can go wrong, it's often that there's a handful of types of actions that you can take. So all these different use cases of what can you do to improve a metric often fall in a set of things, which is, and this is informed by the statistics, it's exception. So this has gone wrong by exception. And in that case, you have to design a solution or an action that deals with exceptions only. The other type of way things can go wrong is by execution. And what by that I mean is actually you see a distribution of performance. And the easiest way to improve performance is when you see a broad distribution, right? Because that means actually let's identify the lower quartile of performers, whether that's objects or people, and let's get them up towards the middle. Like it's not about your best day, repeating that. It's actually limiting your worst days in performance to improve it. And then the third way in which understanding performance is really important is if the distribution of performance is really tight, then actually that means you might need to actually rethink the entire process, because kind of everyone's doing it wrong, or every product's doing it wrong, or etc. So that would go, okay, we need something a bit more wholesale. The fourth example is policies, where you're making a decision on a policy, like should we do this, should we do this, how much should we allocate to labor, what will that give us in extra sales, as an example. And then the fifth, which is more and more important, is an algorithm, where you go, actually, this process is fundamentally underpinned by a decision, and there's so much scope for us to improve this decision by creating some ML AI to improve the decision making in the process. And those are the typical types of performance action I see. And then the final bit is making this really consumable, right? And it's no good to go and all to this trouble unless you make it really obvious. Back to the doctor analogy of where to focus and what action to take. And this isn't about reams and reams of dashboards. This is actually getting more and more towards what's the prescriptive action. So actually do this and this will happen. And then you can bring in interesting things wider than data, like the 4 laws of behavior change, which can you monetize that? So if they were to take that action, how much would that improve performance back up to the P&L? And then you can use gamification. So they've followed your actions previously. How much have they helped save the company or increase sales? And that's really important, because, you know, my big thing about metrics is the cultural adoption of it. They aren't intended to be a stick. They're intended to be a carrot. People want to be engaged and see what impact positive they can drive to the P&L. So actually, that's what you want to get down to, is how you link the P&L impact down to those failure states with a prescriptive action to be like, do this and this will improve. Just like a doctor will say, stop drinking, your liver will improve, or whatever. I don't know. It's dry January. Looking forward to February. And that's the methodology.
Yep. Perfect. Okay, cool. There's a ton of questions stacking up. But before I forget, I want to touch on something. So obviously this is really geared around process, looking at how you can improve process and all the ways that processes can fall down or fall over or whatever, creating the metrics that tell you the performance of those processes, basically. And then it all works from there. I guess for people listening to this that are thinking, okay, that, you know, I followed that methodology, I've got a rough idea of how that could work. What's the starting point as it relates to which kind of P&L outputs that you focus on? Is there anything there that you can give us in terms of what's important and where to start? Because I imagine that that's one of those things that you could look at everything across the business, right? I'm presuming you're going to tell me it needs to be aligned to business goals and strategy and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so it applies to, you know, heavily process-based, also customer journeys. So digital organizations and customer journey funnels can apply this in the same way. So sort of talk about processes and customer journeys interchangeably. What to look for? I guess keys to look for is firstly where you'll think you'll get sponsorship, right? Someone who's going to be interested in understanding performance in an objective way, right? Because I guess this shines a light on performance. And truth be told, not everyone wants that. So you need a sponsor that actually wants to be data driven, and even if that means it's telling them how they're actually not helping performance of the company. So which whittles down your people quite quickly. So that would be one. I think the second one is, where processes cross multiple teams. So maybe multiple divisions, multiple teams. And what that means is there's probably not an obvious silver bullet to what the problem is, like hypothesis led. Okay, there's only so many things that can go wrong. It's probably this one, right? That's still where hypothesis has a lot of value. So you're looking actually where the potentially a number of root causes across a number of teams, and it isn't obvious which ones are going to be the biggest root causes and which teams need to do the most action. And then ultimately, you have got to get the data to be able to do all of this. So ideally starting in places that might mean you're not working on the processes that might be the most valuable, but you need to get some wins on the belt to gain momentum and get buy-in. So you might factor in some processes which maybe don't have the biggest P&L impact. So, but where the data exists, so you can start working with this and get some wins.
Yeah, so the quick wins there becomes about proving the methodology as a concept that can work, and then that can be applied to potentially bigger and better things. And you've got to factor in who you're doing that work with as far as sponsorship goes, and do you have access and the right condition of data to tackle that particular use case, I guess. Yeah, makes perfect sense. Let's try and knock some of these questions out, Pete, if we can. So John Cook has asked, how do you've kind of touched upon this a little bit, but how do you get senior management on board with measurement when they may be resistant to them kind of gut versus empirical, that whole debate?
Yeah, you have to pick your sponsors. You have to do it with them. So it has to be a win-win, right? And you're not intending to expose them. You're wanting to get their buy-in up front, and essentially, you have to still be a bit of a servant in all of this, and ultimately them to take the glory of look how they're improving the performance of their business. So I think that's important, and then ultimately get to a measurable opportunity size of prize as quickly as possible. The sooner you can get to that, the sooner you can get people's attention. Because as much as I love the methodology, stakeholders aren't really interested in it. They want to know pounds as quickly as possible, and so you need to get to that as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Nice, makes sense. German asked, one of the struggles is business process and availability of BPO and standard or unified processes. How is this represented in the metrics / KPIs that affect the data side?
Yeah, this is a big problem, or a time-consuming part, right? So in any of the organisations I've worked across, because I guess what I'm talking about is representative of a whole bunch of organisations, not an individual one. Any of the organisations I've worked across, you'd love it for there to be some process maps already existing, and 99 times out of 100 there isn't. So in that root causing, actually, you're having to spend time investing in actually working with people to build out the process maps. And that's, again, not something you typically see on a job spec of a data person, creating metrics, creating business process maps. But unfortunately, it's kind of like, it's rare this day and age. You still have business processing mapping teams in an organization. So you kind of have to do it yourself. And this is where ultimately, if you've got that size of the prize beforehand, you can leverage that to say, there's a big size of the prize here. It's £10 million, whatever. But it's going to take us now a bit of time to go off and process map that. And maybe even you'll get some support to do that, because stakeholders will be quick to want to get to the answer.
Yeah, makes sense. John has asked or said, he works predominantly with SMEs at the lower end and micro businesses. They often do not have even a simple data policy in place. They suffer from, this is the way we've always done it. What is the key takeaway to encourage them on the value of data and analytics?
Oh, that's a good question, John. But ultimately it comes back to getting metrics that people can action to drive P&L and performance, and often in the pitch of this, you're saying this could make you look better because you're going to be able to demonstrate and show how what you're doing is actually making a positive impact to the P&L. So sort of the sales pitch of all of this is something I'm still working on, and sort of doesn't come naturally to people in data analytics. So, but yeah, that would be my view so far.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of them things. It's obviously the complexity of a size of business and how much data they have and how siloed it is, and the kind of the working across different teams and so on and so forth becomes more complex the bigger you are. But fundamentally, at its very core, it's still thinking about what are the processes that drive performance, what are the ways that can fall over, what are the metrics by how we measure them, and how do we improve that, and what is the action we need to take to do so.
Right? Yeah. Okay. And just looking at, distracted by a point John's just replied back with. Yeah, it does align with Six Sigma and DMAC, right? I guess the methodology, one of the things that we talk about is actually taking great practice that already exists that people perhaps don't use so much and have forgotten about in the because it's no longer flavor of the month, but process mapping, Six Sigma, DMAC, Lean, McKinsey old school, issue trees. This stuff is still golden, and essentially the methodology, we haven't invented anything new. We've just put a load of great, well-proven concepts together.
Yeah, makes sense. Jonathan asked if you're able to give a kind of worked end-to-end example. I appreciate there's only so much you can say right on this, yeah. But is there a way you can just join some high-level dots as to, here was the problem, here's what we did, here was the outcome?
Yeah, can I give two examples, or
yeah, go ahead.
Feel free to whittle it down to one.
Why not?
So I'll give two examples. The first one is losing weight, because it's something that everyone can relate to, and then the second one I'll give a retail example. So if we talk about losing weight, right, it's losing weight is your weight is a lag metric, right? You get on the scales after 2 weeks, after a month, and work out actually have you lost any weight at all, and it's looking back. And so, thinking about what's the process, what are the controllable inputs to losing weight, with domain expertise, it's, am I sleeping right? Am I exercising? Have I got the nutrition? And so those become your controllable inputs. So the idea is that you can understand them on a daily basis and almost predict whether you're going to lose weight or not, right? And you focus on how well you're performing on your controllable inputs, because if you focus on them, then the losing weight takes care of itself, right? So your failure states then become number of days, or a day you haven't, slept well, a day you haven't ate well, a day you haven't got your steps in, a day you haven't been in the gym. And so on a daily basis, if you've failed on all of your controllable inputs, and then you continually fail on a number of those things, then you're not going to achieve your goal. And so then your roadmap activities become, okay, what do I need to do to sleep well? What do I need to do to get my nutrition? Okay, I'll learn healthy recipes and all that sort of stuff. So that's like the real simple example I give. If we take like a retail business, like a transaction-based business, that's probably the most popular business model. You think of a customer journey, and a customer journey can not necessarily be linear, but broadly follows some steps where they'll land on a site, they'll look for products, they'll find those products, they'll add them to baskets, they'll check out, they'll select a fulfillment methodology, fulfillment process that will be fulfilled and deliver on your doorstep. And so your output metric is the sales of a fulfilled order, right? And so your failure state metrics is what are all the ways that customer journey can go wrong. So if they land on site, they can't find what they're looking for. They land on site, the product's not available. The checkout page doesn't work. The crashes, or they get that far, but that you don't deliver to their local area, or delivery's 2 weeks out and they need it in 2 days, or you decline their payment method, it doesn't go through. And so those become, your failure metrics, describing ways in which that customer journey goes wrong. And then you're essentially measuring that, and you've got essentially a view of your funnel and all the ways it can go wrong, and you're putting numbers to that. So then actually, if we know sales are down through our digital channel this week, we've got an idea of what's dropped out, what's the biggest dropout.
Yeah, makes sense. And then the work becomes around, well, how do we fix it? Which is the thing it's most likely to be? And if we fix that problem, it doesn't happen again, then we can predict an uplift in X. If we do Y. Okay.
So if we've got £1 million to spend on improving our digital customer journey, where do we spend that £1 million?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Andreas has asked, or said and then asked, this is very much top-down value. It would require a lot of cooperation between the CDO, CFO, and COO. They have to agree on the process, the impact, and the current way the organisation is working. How do you support the creation of new value and transformation?
Ooh, not quite sure on that, but I guess so I'll give an answer and feel free to be more specific. So it does require support. I think I've got experience of doing it actually not fully top down. So you can go in at the process, and at the process level, actually you can have operational or lower management level people, the ones that are executing the process. So you can have the exercise that can be you're in. So you don't necessarily have to start top down. You can go in at the process level and go, how do we think this process is performing and what's going wrong, and then work your way back up to put a value on that when you think there's an opportunity that the process is going wrong. So you can do it that way. The way I'm keen to potentially go up first is because you get that sponsorship. And you get that buy-in and support you need. But yeah, I think for understanding the P&L impact, you do need finance input, but actually at the process level, it's more operational management staff that are doing and executing the process.
Yeah, nice. Quick question from me on this. What's the relationship here, Pete, with the CFO? Because I know that one of the big things that I get from this type of conversation and conversations that I have that are similar in nature is that almost the concept of not marking your own homework and being accounted for by the finance office or whoever is responsible for that. How does that work?
Yeah, it's super important from the finance and the business, because I mean, Benny talked about this on a podcast he's done, right, which is types of value qualification. And I guess you're wanting to go from an addressable gross size of the prize to a realistic, what's the actual performance improvement we think we can get to, and then actually do finance sign off on all of that. And so you need both finance to sign off on the logic of how the process impacts the P&L. And then you need your business stakeholders to sign up for what they think that the actual realistic performance improvement could be, because they could be quite significantly different numbers. And I think you need to be really careful, or it's important to be careful to go, this might be the gross size of the prize, but we're clearly labeling it as gross as the size of the prize, because actually we think the opportunity addressable might only be 10% of that, right? That's actually what's realistic, but 10% can be still a really valuable, worthwhile number.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's interesting. So you have an agreement with the CFO that this is the logic that's gotten you to that point of saying this is how we've got there, but actually the number is almost agreed upon by the business stakeholder to say this is the kind of improvement of that process and metric, and therefore
it comes back to the business buy-in and making friends, not enemies, right? You don't want to be like, oh, we think you can save £2 million, and they're like, what? How? Why? So you have to have a hugely collaborative, hugely get buy-in, and rely on the business who's the expert on what they think is achievable, and finance on actually how the finance. But it's something that's taken me probably too long to realize, is that finance are experts on the P&L. They don't necessarily go as far back to organisational boundaries of understanding how processes fail, and that's what the experts, the data team, can be. And then you join the two together to know, actually, this is processes failing in this way. Finance, how does this then get manifested into the P&L?
Yeah, makes sense. I'm conscious of time, Pete. We've probably got about 10 minutes before we need to start wrapping things up, but there's still an abundance of question here. Jonathan has asked, he said, additionally, the process sounds very robust, but also as if it will take some time and buy-in to see the concrete results. How do you get the quick wins from this in more adverse situation in order to get the buy-in to do this at scale? So you kind of touched upon this earlier, but just, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really important point of the sales process, and I deliberately say sales, right, because we're trying to sell this to stakeholders. And I think there's two parts to that. I think one is how can you iterate through it? So, for example, I talked to getting a gross size of the prize to get some initial traction, and then get finance involved to then iterate on that to get a finance approved figure. And I guess the other part of that is how wide and broad you go with the sort of process side of things. So, it does work really well on end-to-end processes, like I say, where there's a huge number of potential failure state reasons and different teams and stakeholders involved. You can map that process at a high level to show it is broad, but then you can take a sliver of it, and that might be through some intuition and some quick analysis to go, actually, have we got a hypothesis of which part of this process might be broken the most? Okay, let's apply everything I've said, but just to a sliver of it, and then ultimately, the key is to try and do some quick and dirty analysis to get some output with caveats, rather than perfecting in a quiet room by yourselves.
Nice. Yeah. Nora's asked another great question, which she basically said, data-driven does not necessarily imply operational objectivity. What needs to be true culturally in an organization to reduce emotion, increase the efficacy of the data framework?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is a challenge, right? You are hoping to apply this to a part of the organization that's willing and open to be data driven, and almost what that means to be data driven is, and that means that they believe in the measurement, they believe in the data, they will wait for their action to based on what the measurement and the data says. And it's not to blindly 100% follow the data, because people's expertise is still important. You need to still factor that in. But they need to be open to the fact that if the data tells them that their preconditioned thoughts of what might be going wrong is different to what they thought, they're willing and open to change their minds on that. And that's something perhaps you're testing conversations when you're qualifying where you might apply this to. Certainly in the early days, when you might not have wins under your belt, you want to go to an area that's going to get some buy-in to this, and then not resist actually utilizing this work. And then as you've got more case studies, in the same way a consultancy will sell, as you've got more case studies, then you're able to be a bit bolder and braver in terms of challenging areas that aren't willing to be data driven so much, but in a soft way, because it's like, this methodology's worked over here so well, why wouldn't you adopt it?
Yeah, makes sense. We've got an anonymous LinkedIn user who's asked two questions. So they basically said they see the size of the prize as the critical component to the process of prioritizing metrics. In your experience, how close is the estimated prediction versus the actual results once in motion, which is good. And then the second part of that question is, do you also undertake the study of relationship between metrics as there are interrelationships existing between them?
Yeah. Oh, so the first one, yeah, that can be wildly different, right? But I think it's always good to have a healthy view of what's the gross, what's then the addressable, and then as you push that through the various different root causes, actually, of the 10 root causes, that's only going to be a percentage of the addressable. So yeah, you need to be really comfortable and going with an open mind that the gross size of the prize will come vastly down. It's another great CEO anecdote, right? I think the Tesco CEO once said this, that if he added up all the business cases of all the initiatives on his desk, he'd double the size of the company. But it's back to the philosophy around this is that there's no silver bullet that's going to grow a company by 10%, because if it was that obvious, it would be done already. This is about continuous improvement and identifying many opportunities to improve the performance and stacking those up in terms of compounding, rather than a single, hey, this is a big, wonderful idea here.
Yeah, makes sense. Gabriel's asked, who and how follows up on the impact of the actions to correct failures / reduce bad days?
Yeah, so then this comes back to the consumption, and then I guess a big part which we've not talked about where tech comes in is productionizing these metrics, and making them available on self-serve, so you can trend the performance of a metric. Again, you can use so you can see how it's performing over time, and then if you want, you can use use statistics and alerts to try and identify and spot rapid changes and declines in a metric, potentially within a particular subgroup. So the stock market does this well in 5-day moving averages, right? So it's trending upwards, but a particular part of a product, a store, a customer, a channel might have a really poor 5-day moving average, and that's where statistics are really helpful to try and spot that and make that observable so that it can take action.
Yeah, cool. Makes sense. Ian has asked about the timescales, as in timescales, is ROI typically measured in or expected to be measured in days, weeks, months, or years? Does that differ to maybe what the business expectations are?
Yeah, so I guess ROI, it's a good question. Is this in the context of here's the size of the opportunity, how much have you spent making that opportunity visible through this process? And I guess if you have finance involved, most of finance, right, works in annual cycles. So ROI typically annually, right? And I guess that's a big part of, like, when you do algorithms, right? The first year's the most expensive in terms of the build, and then if it's something that, and again, continuous performance, if it's part of a process that's going to be continually long-lived, then as the years go on, provided that algorithm's still relevant, then it starts to increase its payback.
Yeah, okay, fine. So the actual measurement of the ROI is done on a kind of annual basis. Interesting. Okay. Andreas has followed up and said, when you talk about data and metrics, do you mean that the data team should focus on better analytical systems and metrics, or should they try to get better process tools to get better performance?
Get better at creating and ideating on metrics to measure the performance of a process and the ways in which a process can go wrong. So yeah, back to my view that I don't think to date I've ever seen on the CV of an analyst or CV on someone who works in data, their role is to create metrics to better understand and measure the performance of a business. Never seen that in 20 years, but that's what they should be doing.
Yep, cool. Conscious of time, Peter, have you got a few more minutes? We'll try and get these questions.
Yeah, go on then. Yeah.
So Nick has asked if he's basically said he's curious if you've used any LLM tools recently to help with any parts of this process. I knew we wouldn't get through this whole thing without mentioning LLM.
I mean, this is where I might call in the help of John Cock in the future, who's ChatGPT John, as I like to call it. Him. No, I mean, at the moment, like a lot of the ways that we've identifying performance of a process has been in mapping the process, whether it's linear or if it's a number of processes that are going on at the same time, then using sort of more just rules-based logic to identify, okay, if there's 5 processes happening at the same time, which is the one that's broken it. So not at the moment, but I guess that also leads to having all your data available and an ability to sort of mine it. But at the moment, no, we don't use LLMs.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. Final 2 questions then. So Natasha has asked, how do you manage ownership of metrics? I find there's often reluctance to be the owner or a lack of understanding of what ownership means.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, this is the whole point where it's massively collaborative, right? And through the process, you're identifying the roles in the organization, the roles in the business, based on their roles and responsibilities that would own a metric, and that's really important, right? Because if you engage them back to, generally people are sort of are good natured and want to understand how they can drive and demonstrate that they're helping the business. But the more granular you make a metric, the more obvious it becomes which role would own it in the business, and it's more difficult to say, oh, that's not me, I shouldn't own that. But ultimately you need a business owner for it. And again, back to monetizing a lot of this, the more you can put a value on stuff, the more it promotes the need and agitates action and ownership.
Yeah, makes sense. Last question then. So Andrew Sharp has asked or said, is there an ideal number of key metrics to have? Too many could result in a lack of focus. Too few will oversimplify business drivers. Good question.
So yeah, I mean, I've got a view on this. It might not be right, and I 100% get the sentiment of that, Andrew. But I think don't constrain yourself by the number of metrics. The number of metrics should represent the number of ways a business can go wrong, and the more actionable, the more granular you are with your data, the more it becomes valuable, because the more it becomes actionable. So yeah, there's probably somewhere in that an 80-20 rule where you can identify, the most valuable parts. So I get that. But also to counter that, the importance of metrics trees. And this is something, again, the industry doesn't talk about enough, but people are often overwhelmed saying there's too many metrics already. And that's because a lot of the metrics aren't structured in a sort of drill down taxonomy, root and branches. And because they're not organized in that way, it's not easy to follow how the metrics follow it and link to one another. And the other point is, if you're being really granular with your metrics, actually you're granular with your ownership. And it soon becomes clear that perhaps in a role, there might be a limited number of metrics any given role in an organization can actually action. And that's the point. We're only giving metrics to people that they can really action. And so the more granular you can be, the more you find actually someone says they want 20 metrics in a dashboard. You start asking them, okay, are those 20 metrics, how many can they action in their role and responsibility? And you find out not many of them. They just want to know about them. And it's like, okay, well, let's give you the metrics, the 5 metrics that you can really action.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So to wrap up then, Pete, what I'm keen to do is, if there are people out there that are listening to this, and obviously there a lot are because a lot of questions have come in, are there any final considerations? Like what are the hints and tips and maybe tricks that if someone's at the start of this journey or thinking about this, maybe going away thinking about putting some thought into how this applies to the context of their role and their business, what things would you urge them to consider?
Firstly, that this is hard. So good effort on having the appetite to even start. So yeah, it is hard, right? And I guess this is why I'm finding loads and loads of people aren't doing it, right? But I guess I would say start small. Pick somewhere that you have got good relationships with, potentially where you've got a sponsor, a domain area that you're familiar with. And get some wins under the table. Don't think what's the biggest issue on the P&L, and I'll start there. Start actually with, okay, I want to get a win under the table and get some confidence in how we do this, and then look to grow, scale, and appetite to tackle harder ones.
Yeah, cool. I think we come up with a POMS, proof of methodology.
Yeah.
There we go. I also understand there's an article coming out or some kind of editorial piece that you're going to pull all of your thoughts into written format. So
Yeah.
give us the high level, when that will be, what that will consist of, where people can find it.
Yeah, really exciting. So we're looking to me and a co-creator on this, not to co-creators. This is not all my brain work. Yeah, we're looking to. I mean, the more we talk about this, the more that we're identifying that there's actually a real need for this. That we think we've got a repeatable methodology that solves a common problem. So yeah, we're in the process of speaking to a few sort of publishing organisations with an article. No set date at the moment, but yeah, I'm sure we'll let people know as and when that happens.
Cool, fine, excellent, sounds good. Well, Pete, thank you so much for your time. Sorry we've run over ever so slightly, but as I did think would be the case, a topic that obviously is top of mind for a lot of people. So we appreciate your time. Thanks to the audience for all your questions and for tuning in. And we'll see you again next time.
Cool. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
See you later. Bye.